If you're investing in soccer, you sort of hinted at this earlier. I mean, in some ways, if you're trying to capitalize on the World Cup, it's not that you're too late, but you shouldn't be coming into the sport now and saying, we're just going to come in for the final 6 to 9 months and capitalize on the 2026 World Cup. My recommendation is, if you think soccer is a place where you can connect with potential customers or grow your brand, is commit to it over a multi-year window, right? And really invest.
Welcome to Sponsorable, a podcast that brings together sports organizers and brand leaders to talk about the business of grassroots sports. I'm Garrett Shea, and I've spent the last 20 years in the youth sports industry, where I've built nationally televised sporting events as well as national corporate sponsorship programs. I created this podcast to bring in experts from across the sports and have them share what they do in the space and how they do it. My guest today is going to talk about leading a creative and content agency, along with activating sponsorships at the World Cup, MLS, and USL levels. Please welcome CEO of Name and Number, Kyle Shelton. All right, Kyle. Well, hey, it's great to have you. Great to be talking soccer as we lead into 2026. And there's a ton of big brands right now that are planning. What is 2026 going to entail for them? A lot of them are focused on soccer, but ironically, a lot of them are trying to figure out, like, how am I going to activate soccer? Clearly, you have great experience, from an agency standpoint, as you lead, you lead Name and Number, and you've got great past experience activating for brands with MLS teams. As you look to 2026 and you're thinking about, brands that want to activate with soccer, how challenging is it for some of these big brands to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. It's great to join you on the show. I think soccer is the most challenging sport to activate in American sports, and in many ways, it's the reason I launched Name and Number. We're a soccer-specific marketing creative agency who ultimately are tasked with trying to help brands and sponsors connect to soccer fans. And, soccer is amazing because it is so diverse and so fragmented and so nuanced that it requires an understanding and a depth of knowledge in a way that I think other sports in this country don't necessarily. So everyone understands that 2026 is going to be massive. I've been saying for a couple of years, it will be the biggest sporting event in human history. And I believe that to be true. It's an expanded World Cup from 32 teams to 48 teams, meaningfully bigger number of games played in 3 countries. So everyone sort of understands that there is a massive opportunity and that they should be thinking about soccer. What's not as obvious is, how do you plug into soccer fans in North America more broadly? Everyone sort of understands at a surface level that it is diverse and nuanced, but to really go into and try to connect with soccer fans is really the challenge. So part of what we spend a lot of our time thinking about is how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to a lot of brands and a lot of brands that are official partners of FIFA World Cup. And I will say I am very surprised that many of them still don't know what they're going to do from an activation standpoint. So that kind of underlines your statement that, soccer is hard to activate because you want to be an authentic brand to soccer. You don't just want to kind of be like, hey, I just flew in and now I'm a great sponsor supporter of soccer. Although that might be, it's kind of like that might be what it feels like if you don't have a really well thought out strategy and activation. So like, how have you gone about helping, corporate brands think about kind of what they want to do and how they want to do it and their, the complete strategy?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals of what you want to do as a sponsor in any sport don't change, right? Which is, who do you want to reach? And ultimately, what is your business objective? What are you trying to do through your sponsorship? And obviously, that can be a really wide variance, right? It could be something as simple as brand affinity. It may be customer acquisition. It could be really geographically focused. So the starting point is, I think you have to understand what you're trying to do. And the challenge in soccer specifically is that if you don't understand in particular who your target audience is, you will really struggle because your ability to put together a diverse portfolio of opportunities in the space varies pretty wildly. So I'll just give you a couple examples. Take a company like Kroger, which is a regional grocery store. I'm not sure if they're where you are, Garrett, but they're in the neck of the woods where I am, in West Virginia, Ohio region. They spend in soccer, but they're very regionally focused. So they have FC Cincinnati sleeve patch. They sponsor with the men's and women's teams in Louisville. They sponsor Lexington Sporting Club, and they sponsor a youth soccer club in Roanoke, Virginia. Very regionally focused in the sport of soccer. But then you take somebody like Ally Financial, big national brand. They're spending a lot more money in the sport. They've got the NWSL sleeve patch. They got Charlotte FC front of jersey. They sponsored Wrexham's U.S. tour. They sponsored TST, which is a 7-a-side soccer tournament in North Carolina, and Detroit City FC, right? So there's these really interesting ways you can put together packages to reach different segments of the population. And that's without even touching on the Hispanic market here, which is obviously meaningful and significant. And that's a whole different approach. So just to reiterate, it starts with who are you trying to reach and ultimately what is your business objective. The same way would be for any sports sponsorship, but it requires a little more thoughtfulness and a little more focus on what are the assets that you secure to go and do it. And then obviously next phase is how do you activate them?
Sure. No, and you bring up, some great assets, and one of the reasons I love soccer as a like from a sponsorable sport standpoint is the fact that the front of the jersey can be a corporate brand, and the fans and the players and all of the stakeholders love the fact that corporation is on the front of the jersey. And so like that to me is such a great moment in sports sponsorship because 25 years ago I don't think that was necessarily the case. Like I think everybody kind of stiff-armed corporate America for, coming onto the sports fields and kind of certainly, commercializing, if you would, sport. Now it seems to be, soccer has really been, at least in my opinion, is the forefront of embracing it and getting and kind of bridging that gap between commercialization and sport. That being said, there typically can only be one front of the jersey, right, partner, and yes, you got the sleeve partner, but I'm sure there's a lot of different ways brands are looking to activate. Maybe talk about a little bit about like if a brand can't get on the front of the jersey or the sleeve, like what have you seen from an activation standpoint that you're like, wow, this is a great activation.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Garrett, on your note there. I mean, soccer has really kind of led the way, and you've seen the other leagues really follow now, where you're adding patches on just about every uniform that is in every major sport in America. And yeah, the front of jersey, just to give you a little context, and you probably know this, but maybe some of your listenership doesn't. Front of jersey on an MLS team can be anywhere from $5 to $10 million annually, and sometimes more depending on the club, and NWSL probably a little bit less than that. So you're talking about a massive investment to be front of jersey. It is, I think, the most impactful asset you can purchase. You're attached to every single celebratory moment of a club during its history. And in soccer, if someone's a deep soccer fan, like they know the years that sponsors were on their team's kit based on how the team performed and how it looked. So there's incredible long-term value in that spot. But to your point, very expensive and many can't do it. My counsel for brands that want to spend in soccer, again, probably isn't dissimilar from how you'd think about it for other sports, is you need the association, right? The reason you're doing it is for the affinity that fans have for their team. But don't just secure the asset. I think the sponsorships that struggle the most are the ones where they just secure the partnership, right? The official designation, and they spend all their money on that thing, and then they don't activate it. Activations can obviously vary pretty wildly, and depending on your business objectives, you want to be very content focused, you may be very experiential focused, you want people to walk through some experience. So it's sort of independent of what your actual activation is, but to ensure that as you allocate dollars and resources towards a sponsorship, that you're not just securing the rights, but then you're activating them and doing it in a way that moves the business forward meaningfully. I always soccer maybe is a little bit unique in this way, and I don't know other sports as well, but I always also encourage securing the rights to a number of players, because I think they, as spokespeople, can amplify what is just inherently sort of a silent, stagnant logo present somewhere, whether that's in stadium on field boards or jumbotron, or it's signage, outside the stadium. Is if you've got someone that can actually represent your brand and activate your content, your voice, your brand, that's going to give you a little bit stronger position. Obviously, it all comes down to investment level, but if you have the ability to do so, I like securing a variety of assets, inclusive of maybe some player access.
Hmm. Um, and as you or one talking about the player access, is that typical? And I'm not as well versed in MLS and player marketing. Do you have to individually go to each player, or is there the ability to go to the union and do like the NFL PA, just kind of do a more of a group licensing approach?
Yeah, I think in MLS and I think NWSL are similar, where there's a rule of four where you can use the images of players in the team, but it has to be minimum 4 players. My note is more so, if you really want to activate more fully, then you might go to the player or the players association directly and do a separate sponsorship deal. The ones that I've seen work best are when you go to the player directly and secure their rights for a period of time. And again, maybe they're in a commercial spot, maybe they're in a piece of content. So it can vary in terms of what you do with them. But I sort of prefer the approach of speaking to the player directly and securing them for, ideally for the term of whatever your sponsorship deal is with the club.
Sure. And from a content standpoint, I've got to believe, like, it is, especially the ones that the sponsors that are able to have the front of the jersey or the sleeve, like the opportunity to create content with the team. Maybe talk us through kind of what that kind of process looks like, and how have you seen brands successfully activate using content? Content of a MLS team that maybe they have a sponsorship with.
Yeah, I think it's always the magic is always in the marrying of the two things, right? And it's bringing together what the fan cares about and what the brand is ultimately trying to achieve. We're actually in the midst of a production for NYCFC right now, New York City Football Club, and we'll be in market shooting a piece of branded content for Xylem, who is their global water technology partner. And we have access to 4 players. We have access to their head coach, and we've put together a piece of content that is player centric, but really it's fun and playful. I think at the end of the day, social content either has to entertain, or ideally it's entertaining, but it has to add value in some way, or it has to add value to that person's experience when they're scrolling through their feed. And as we know, man, the flick of the thumb, it goes quickly, right? Like, you're moving on to the next thing very, very quickly. So how do you create something ultimately that adds some amount of value, some amount of entertainment? And in the case of this NYCFC project, we're trying to infuse some education, right? So Xylem, as a kind of water conservation company, wants folks to understand how can they as individuals impact water sustainability. And so we're shooting in a classic New York City laundromat with 4 players, and they'll be providing sort of fun water saving tips to New York City citizens. And we're trying to do it in a way that is fun and playful. We're sort of positioning the players as like superheroes who appear out of nowhere with a little water safety tip. It's all in the production and the execution, if we can actually make it fun and entertaining, but that's sort of the idea. And I think it's a good example because it is about the marriage of players who the fans care about with the messaging of the brand. And that can come to life in a lot of different ways. And the other layer I'd add, Garrett, to that is how you do it for YouTube versus TikTok versus Instagram versus an in-stadium video varies very differently. And so how you actually shoot it, right? What you do in pre-production, and then the production itself matters meaningfully, because how you shoot something for one of those social channels versus maybe a commercial spot is very, very different. So that layer of thought and complexity and preparation really matters.
And as a creative agency and marketing agency, how do you prepare for that type of a shoot? Are you storyboarding it? Are you like, is it? I mean, I gotta believe that is one of those moments where you got 4 players, you got the head coach, there's certainly an urgency to to capture all of the right content, and then to your point, capture the right content for the right platforms, channels.
Yeah, it's all in the planning and pre-production. You end up having about 2 hours of total shoot time between players and coach. We'll have a series of actors and extras as well incorporated that we'll have some more time with. But as is always the case, right? There are multiple stakeholders. You have the club itself. You have not only the club like partnership group with the branded content group, and then the technical staff, right? The trainers, the coaches, they care what their players are doing. So you're managing through the club. You're working with the partner, right? The sponsor who has a particular idea for what it should be. And oftentimes they have their own agency who are helping to guide it, which is the case with NYCFC. Sport 5 is working with Xylem. So we're working across all those stakeholders. But in our case, we own production from concept all the way through to final delivery. So that's everything to your point about it's everything from storyboarding to scripting to location identification to how we're shooting it. So references for like what we think it could look like, all the visuals, script writing with obviously rounds of edits. And then we're hiring the crew to go shoot it, and then we'll edit it, and there'll be a back and forth process to get it to the final version. In this case, there'll be sort of a hero video that'll be 45 to 60 seconds long, and then a series of cut downs for social. So we like owning as much of the process and project as we can, just because it kind of creates a little bit of clarity of vision and connection across the whole thing. But you're always working with a variety of stakeholders and have to manage through their particular ideas about what it should be and how it should come together.
And how challenging is it? I think back to when Peyton Manning first came out with his commercials when he had just kind of come into the league, and they were okay, right? And you watched them, and you're like, oh, okay, but at some point in his career, something clicked for him, and they were like fantastic. I liked watching Peyton Manning commercials, and still do, more so than just about anybody else, because they're funny. He's got great timing, all of those pieces. But you're working with four players. Talk about the challenges of, obviously they're the talent, they're the attraction that people want to see. But it's, this is it's a commercial. It's it's video content. They've got to be able to deliver a line and do it well. Talk about those challenges.
Yeah, it's and the MLS players are different than NFL players, right? They don't get the same reps that a Peyton Manning or a star quarterback might. So it's funny. We had a call this morning with the club about the players that we have, and so I think it's a lot of it is again in the planning and preparation, which is ensuring you understand who are the players that are going to be comfortable, that bring some personality, that can deliver a line. In the case of NYCFC, just to stick with that example, there's a player who's doing media training already thinking about post-career, so is very comfortable. We've got another player who maybe is a little more junior, less experienced, and we just know going into it that that's probably not the player we're relying on. So it's a lot in the preparation, understanding the unique personalities of the players. And then it's also, I think, how you manage the shoot on location, which is the right director and the right crew who are there can pull out of the players. You have to make them comfortable. In our case, we always do just as an example, like we always do a huddle with every single crew member and talent to start any production so that everyone is looking each other in the eye. They're getting introduced. Everyone knows what the role is. And that puts people at ease pretty quickly, because the last thing you want to do is walk into a cold set where all these people are scattered around. You're not sure what they're doing. You're not sure who they are. You haven't met them. So that's the starting point. And then we always just try to bring energy, enthusiasm to every shoot, right? That can go a long way. If you're just there to do a job and you're just trying to get the shot and that's all you're focused on, you're not going to get the best out of any player. And so our approach is always, how do you bring energy, enthusiasm, bring a lightness to the work that we're doing? And then you're just, you're making them comfortable by saying, hey, if we have to do this 20 times, that's okay. Like, it's not a problem. You don't have to get it right on the first one. Let's work on it together. Let's be collaborative. And, it always varies by player, but we found over time that approach has lent itself to better finished product and better creative.
Sure. And like for this project with NYCFC, right, they're in this situation for name and number, they're your client, right? And then their sponsor is the water conservative or conservatory group. And so like that's, and just sometimes it's helpful for some of our listeners just to understand the business dynamics, right? That, right, a lot of these pro teams do bring in outside agencies to certainly, especially in content and creative, work, because they don't have that kind of staff on site, or on staff full time. So they bring in the outside experts to handle that type of business.
Yeah, that's right, Garrett. And having worked for 3 MLS clubs in my past, and then I also spent 3 years at NASCAR, is you often will have the staff. You'll have videographers or creatives or motion graphics artists on site, or on your staff rather. But they're bogged down with covering the team, right? Think about the average sports season, man. There's so many games. It's nonstop. There's training sessions and practices. So a lot of times they will rely on external resources to come in on and do individual productions. And we've had cases where we'll actually be on retainer for a full year to deliver X number of creative outputs. And then sometimes, like this New York City FC one, it's just a one-off, and they brought us in just for this one production. They needed support for this one. And then other times it's the sponsor or the brand hiring you. So to your point, yeah, it varies in terms of where the connection and who your client is. And in this case, yeah, it's with the club.
Yeah. And you talked about brands and like, why do brands want to do this type of marketing? I cross over and work with different types of brands, and most of them either come to me and say, listen, I am looking for ROI, or I'm looking for, building my brand and or brand affinity, brand relationships. And those are the best. Like, as I think about activating sponsors or sponsorships, the ROI is it is what it is. Sometimes they do the calculation, say, hey, if I'm going to spend $100,000, I need to make $1 million. And then others sit there and say, okay, if I'm going to spend $100,000, I want to build a brand relationship between, to your earlier point, let's say the target is the fan base, and like, what do they think about my brand, and how does my brand make them feel? And I want them to feel good. And I got to believe that those are probably a little bit more fun projects to work on when you can, find those kind of more the brand building opportunities.
Yeah, it's funny. I sort of enjoy all of it, Garrett. I mean, I think there's something nice about having a brand that has very clear business objectives that are measurable, that allow you to track against that thing. So, right, the very easy one is if someone's trying to increase their name capture, their database, they want more potential customer acquisition to communicate to. Is it then orients your tactics really clearly, right? It's like it sort of points you to what are the types of things we should be doing in order to achieve that business objective. I think if you're invested, I would say kind of more broadly, if you're investing in soccer, you sort of hinted at this earlier. I mean, in some ways, if you're trying to capitalize on the World Cup, it's not that you're too late, but you shouldn't be coming into the sport now and saying, we're just going to come in for the final 6 to 9 months and capitalize on the 2026 World Cup. My recommendation is, if you think soccer is a place where you can connect with potential customers or grow your brand, is commit to it over a multi-year window, right? And really invest. Ultimately, you have to add value, and you have to show a commitment. Soccer is so disconnected and fragmented and nuanced in this country. I think it's the most undervalued property in all of sports. It's young, it's diverse, it's multicultural, it's digital natives. There's a generational shift that's happening right now in terms of the kids that are coming up who already love the sport that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. But you can't just turn it on for a minute and capitalize. I think you have to have a level of commitment, and you have to be ready to sort of add value over a longer period of time. So yeah, again, it's brand affinity is great, and if you're in it kind of for the long haul, then I think there are really cool ways to do that. I like having a business objective or two because it allows you to track and show progress. But all of it is fun.
Yeah. And I got, and you kind of raised it, and I think it's very interesting. As I work with a lot of grassroots soccer organizations, national, regional, state level organizations, but I always find it to be very interesting where you look at brands that are trying to go, let's say, I'm a sponsor of the FIFA World Cup, and how do I drive down and connect at the grassroots level? And then I think, why are more MLS sponsors and I would even say clubs not looking at that, because I think there's something, the fandom side for the MLS club. There's a big benefit to finding a partner and driving down into the grassroots space effectively. I think about like the travel soccer world, and I mean it has exploded. My kids all play travel soccer, but they also play other sports. But they've not been, they love soccer, they love playing it, but they don't love watching it. And it's, it's like, how do you, at some point, how do you engage with, these millions of kids that are playing soccer and get them to become fans of MLS, and to do so with a brand. I think that to me is like, man, that could be a home run if somebody could, figure out that formula.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And it's, having been in the industry for 20 plus years, it is sort of a thought and a mentality that has changed, but is not dissimilar from what it has been for a while, which is youth participation numbers have always been very, very strong over the last 20, 30 years. But there's sort of this point where that changes. And it's usually in high school or as a kid goes into college, is they just kind of fall away from the sport a little bit. Data that I've seen, Garrett, suggests that has changed and evolved, and their soccer fandom is sticking more today than it maybe did 20, 30 years ago. But there's still, I think, a challenge of how do you look at the life cycle of your kind of average youth soccer player, and that transition to fandom, that is still requires some focused attention and some focused thinking. I think sponsors tend to go for the easier, more turnkey sponsorships that are typically at kind of the professional level, because grassroots soccer is hard, right? You probably know better than me, although I've spent a lot of time in youth soccer too. Like, clubs are oftentimes run by volunteers, they're run by parents. They don't have dedicated sponsorship people. So there's a reality to how difficult it is to get scale at the youth level. I think you see sponsors who come in and, they'll sponsor a tournament, they'll sponsor a youth club that has a significant number, like 30, 40, 50 teams across multiple age groups to try and get a little bit of scale. To do that at a national level is really, really hard. So yeah, you're sort of hitting on the $1 million question in some ways, but I think we are seeing a shift because of the accessibility of the sport. Not just, we're talking primarily domestically today, because that's a lot of my experience, but you think about the ability to access global soccer on television and streaming is better than at any point in human history. You can watch almost any league in the world on your devices, and so your ability to kind of become a fan of a team in England or Brazil, or in your backyard in MLS or NWSL, is better than ever before. And I think we're seeing that translate into deeper connections to the sport than maybe there were 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I also am seeing some of the international teams trying to come over and market, like, quite frankly, market to our youth soccer players and soccer families, which I thought was, very interesting to me, because like you would have thought like MLS teams would have kind of had the US on lockdown, but no, like these, different international so soccer teams are coming in, and they are very directly marketing to the youth players, youth families, to try to win over, their fandom, if you would.
Yeah,
Um,
you're exactly right. And we say all the time, it's MLS's competition, right, or even NWSL, as the women's game continues to grow globally as well, is not necessarily the other sports teams that are in their market. A lot of times they're fighting for attention and affinity from global teams. And in the case of MLS, which is my home league and the league that I love, and I spent a lot of time in it, it's just the reality that the leagues in Europe are better with better players, operating at a higher level. And so there's a separation there, that if you're a soccer fan, what does it mean to support Arsenal in the Premier League, but also Atlanta United in your backyard? And to your point, we've done some work with Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen, who are German Bundesliga clubs. We've done a little work with Chelsea in the past. All of them, and I mean all of them, are thinking, what is our U.S. strategy? And not just because of the World Cup, although that's a meaningful driver, it's because it remains an untapped market for these teams in Europe who have full market penetration at home, right? If you're in Bournemouth, England, if you're born in Bournemouth, you're a Bournemouth fan, right? There's not really another option. Like your parents have handed it down to you, your grandparents have handed it down to you. So their opportunity to drive meaningful revenue, not only from fans, but from sponsors, is in other markets. And that's why they're spending time in the US, in Brazil, in China, in India. And so we talked to a lot of teams who are saying, what's our strategy to go connect with fans and ultimately drive revenue in the US market?
Yeah, no, I find that to be fascinating and tracking kind of where this is going to go over the next 2 years. But you'd certainly look at the World Cup and switching back to the conversation about brands activating, pushing, pushing down, their brand activation to the grassroots level. I actually look at the World Cup and think, man, there's it's to me, it's the easiest event, kind of program to support as a fan, because of course I'm rooting for Team USA, right? It's like that's a great one to be able to say, yes, I'm rooting for Team USA. I'm pulling for them. I'm connecting with them, assuming that the brand has the ability to push, to at least utilize the U.S. soccer marks or Team USA marks, and then drive down into the community level. I feel like that is a really strong opportunity for some brands, to look at. But to me, it's like that's a way to activate across the United States with the grassroots soccer world, because you don't have to divvy up and say, well, hey, what MLS team are you? It's, hopefully everybody in the US is pulling for Team USA. And then, you have a chance to activate, with, or with those folks in those communities, and, eventually US soccer.
Yeah, what's interesting about what you said there is, I think you said something to the fact of hopefully everyone in the U.S. is rooting for Team USA, but that's what makes soccer so interesting, is that so many people are rooting for all of the other teams, and why I'm so excited to have the World Cup here again. It's been over 30 years since the World Cup was hosted here in 1994. I've been able to attend one World Cup in my life. It was in Germany in 2006, and there is nothing like it. And I really don't think, unless you're a kind of a hardcore soccer fan and have been in the sport, you really understand what next summer will be like. It's a little bit challenging in our country because it's so spread apart. But what I don't think people quite are tracking yet, Garrett, is that obviously the host cities are just going to be filled with soccer fans. But I think what will be interesting, I think there's an interesting opportunity here for certain brands, which are the markets that aren't hosting games, that are still pretty decent sized markets, right? Like Chicago doesn't have games, DC doesn't have games, Baltimore, basically no one in the Midwest other than Kansas City has games, is that there's going to be a fervor and an interest in the sport during the tournament in every market. And whether that's watch parties or pubs and restaurant activations or, local grassroots tournaments that get stood up just to celebrate the game, it's going to be happening across the country. And I'm really interested in, and have had a number of conversations with brands about a strategy that is like World Cup kind of tangential, because very few brands are securing either World Cup rights or U.S. Soccer Federation rights. It's cost prohibitive, but there's an ability to kind of be connected to the sport in different markets that I think the brands who get that right are really going to win because of how just the onrush and onslaught of the sport of soccer will be during June and July next summer.
And what do you what do you see that, like, if you could devise, like, what that activation looks like? Is it multi-market? Is it just like, hey, I just want to, I want to target Chicago and I want to do X, Y, and Z? Like what's that look like in a market?
It's some of this is obviously there's like a strategic and business objective layer to this that we don't necessarily have in a kind of made up example. But I think that, like, if I were just to advise broadly, it would be create connection, create community, create experiential in a way that allows people to come together to celebrate the sport. If you go back and if someone were to Google or look on YouTube just for U.S. World Cup watch parties, and watch the watch parties that happen all over the country in pubs and restaurants and outdoor settings over the last several World Cups, man, those settings are unbelievable. If you look at the power, here's a specific example. Look at the Power and Light District. I think it's 2 World Cups again now when they're watching the U.S. game. Go back and watch Landon Donovan's goal against Algeria in 20, I think it was 2010 now. Testing my memory, Garrett, it's not a good thing. You have these moments where when you bring people together and they're focused on a match or a game, and there's a layer of like the Olympics that runs through the World Cup because it's kind of national pride, right? You get behind the red, white, and blue because it's your home country. So even if you're not a soccer fan, you can still kind of plug in and enjoy that element, and that's true for other clubs, or sorry, rather federations in the States, right? Is the Mexican American population is the biggest segment of soccer fans in our country. And so what does it look like if you're in any major metropolitan area where there's a massive Mexican American population to try to connect with those folks? So a little bit of a roundabout answer just to say is I think creating experiential and connection in a market is sort of my starting point. And then how do you take whatever that thing is and storytell out of it, right? How do you create content and connection and narrative out of the event itself? So that could be anything from, a big market like Chicago, but it also might be, what are you doing in Omaha, Nebraska? Because there's going to be thousands of people there that want to connect to the sport, even though there isn't a natural connection maybe in Omaha, other than the second or third division team that's there, Union Omaha.
Yeah. Now, have you worked with many of the host city, or are you familiar with kind of the structure of the host city committees, and how, like, are they autonomous? Are they able to create and do whatever they see as being best for their host committee?
When you're working with FIFA, I would say nothing is autonomous. FIFA has, generally speaking, some pretty specific parameters under kind of which you can operate. What is interesting in this World Cup cycle, Garrett, is that I believe it's the first time that the local organizing committees will be able to sell localized sponsorships. So they are kept out of, obviously, categories where FIFA has international sponsors. So, for example, Coca-Cola, one of their longest running sponsors, like, you're not going to go get Pepsi in Dallas, right? But they are able to secure local sponsors. And, I've heard varying things. I think it really is kind of disparate in terms of how the different organizing committees are approaching that, how the host cities are approaching that. But provides them with a really interesting opportunity because they will be the ones who are able to do massive scale watch parties, big activations, have presence in and around the stadiums. Although there are a lot of parameters there, I understand as well. So, it's kind of a first time unique opportunity to activate locally. But as you always see, I've had a conversation with a very big global brand who doesn't have FIFA rights, who doesn't have federation rights, and they're planning a massive like street soccer and gaming tournament in a big market, right? And so they're thinking, how do we, during this time when people are spending, or when they're plugged into the sport, is how do we have presence even though we don't necessarily have naming rights or official designation? And I think you'll see a lot of that. It's going to be, I've been saying a lot, there's going to be a lot of noise next summer. So the question really is for brands is how are they going to break through the noise and the volume? Because it's going to feel like a lot of brands are shouting at soccer fans next summer. And so being thoughtful about what you're doing is going to be really important, not just doing something.
And I really like your idea of targeting potentially, cities that aren't hosting World Cup games, because right at the end of the day, you're not going to have to, deal with FIFA and, the regulations and what you can and can't do. I'm sure there's each city has its own, challenges, but, a city like Omaha, as you pointed out, like that could be a great, city to activate if the brand, really, cared and felt like, hey, that was a strategically important city. But I think that's, super interesting as well. Like how is a brand, how can they go and activate in non-world, like World Cup, host cities? But certainly connect with the soccer community and certainly show that they are an authentic soccer brand, and that how do they build their their brand in the eyes of the community. I really like that as an example.
Yeah, I don't know if Omaha is the best example because that may not be a market a lot of brands are thinking about. But yeah, the broader point of sort of the smaller and mid-sized markets that maybe aren't hosting games. And the other thing I would say, just again, and it's very rarely for me is it like a specific league or club strategy. It's a soccer strategy. I think that's a little bit different, right? If you're want to spend in the NFL, you're probably thinking mostly you're not necessarily saying football strategy. You're saying Dallas Cowboys strategy. You're saying Minnesota Vikings strategy. Probably not true in totality, but I think soccer is different because you can cobble together, which makes it sound non-strategic, but you can package together a series of different assets in order to have massive impact across the sport. And so if you're a brand, I wouldn't necessarily discount the fact that working with an MLS or a USL, which is the sort of second, third, and fourth division in the States, even NWSL in the women's game, even though the tournament next year is the men's tournament, obviously explosive growth in the women's game. You've got the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil, and then 2031 will be hosted in the US, which is not that far away, right? 5 years goes by quick. So having any soccer asset or any soccer property allows you to activate in the sport in an authentic way around the World Cup, even if it's not designation with FIFA or with a federation. So I wouldn't necessarily discount that fact, right? Every MLS team, every USL team, they're all thinking, how do we connect to soccer fans in our market? And so as a brand or a sponsor, you can come in behind them and potentially kind of connect to whatever else they're doing in order to amplify, add value, and find connection to soccer fans.
Sure. And do you work with any USL teams?
We do.
How is that division within soccer? Do you see that as a positive, or is that to like an MLS? Like, or I should maybe ask, how does the MLS see like a division like USL?
It's interesting because not in totality, but mostly the USL teams are in markets outside of MLS. The biggest markets, obviously, you have overlap across leagues. And I'm obviously not sitting in MLS HQ. I think there's probably there's a competitive component as well, because at the end of the day, you're still looking to garner affinity for the sport. And that's why I say, like, the competition isn't necessarily other big sports leagues in the US. It's actually probably leagues abroad. And so USL is kind of another competitive component. I do think, kind of, if I were to step back from my like really focused MLS perspective on it, I think growth of the game is kind of good for everybody. And so you can actually apply some of the same logic to the USL teams that are across the country, because most of them, not exclusively, but a lot of them are in the mid and sort of smaller size markets. And so they're creating connection and growth for the sport in those markets that otherwise maybe wouldn't happen, or certainly wouldn't happen domestically. And I think best example off the top of my head is Vermont Green, which is USL 2. It's actually a pre-professional league. So it's MLS, USL Championship, USL 1, USL 2. So it's sort of like fourth division, and they actually use college players. But again, if you want to Google Vermont Green FC, they just won the USL 2 championship. They're in Burlington, Vermont, which is population 45,000 people, and they are selling out games. They sold out tickets to the final in something like 10 minutes. People are climbing fences to try and watch the game, and just they've created this unbelievable, authentic soccer atmosphere in Burlington, Vermont, at a college stadium. And their brand isn't just connected to Burlington. They've got an incredible brand designed by one of the most talented soccer designers in the world, a guy named Matt Wolf, who's an owner and founder of the team. And they're creating a brand that has local resonance but national impact. And so there's something really interesting happening in these lower division markets. They're also building stadiums, right? They're building soccer stadiums between 5,000 and 10,000 seats. And so I think it's, again, kind of as someone who just loves the game of soccer and wants to see it grow in the US, I think it's a very good and positive thing that this is happening in smaller mid-sized markets. And it's just a part of the competitive landscape in the sport, which is you've got more competition in soccer in America than any other sport in the world.
Sure. And I, you can't help but connect to like minor league baseball, and you've got to, you look at that and say, well, of course it's very, smart, because you want more families to access the sport and to develop some sort of a fan connection to a professional team, so that they can, have a more consistent, if you would, watching, viewing, supporting of soccer outside of your kids playing, youth soccer, right? I mean, part of it is just, training Americans to start to think about, hey, there are ways to watch and engage with soccer. It's a great community, family experience. I can go to the games. I can go on a continued basis. To your point, it's like 5,000 to 10,000, fans at some of these newer stadiums, which to me is great because you're not fighting through, huge traffic and parking lines. And so I look at it and say, man, it is truly a great kind of step for the sport. And I don't think many other sports aside from baseball, at least that I can think of, have developed. And not to say USL is a minor league system, but that experience, though, right? At the end of the day, they've solved they've solved the business challenge, and that is, hey, I want to put these pro soccer teams in some of the smaller markets, make them more accessible for families to go out and enjoy a game, and then bring in maybe smaller sponsors, partners. But in looking at some of the USL sponsors across different markets, I mean, they've got some great portfolios of corporate brands that are really supporting them, and truly activating FanFest, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I'm not the typical soccer fan because I'm in it every day. But I've got two boys. They're 8 and 6. They kind of against my best wishes have become Man City fans because they fell in love with Erling Haaland, who's a very like superhero like figure who bangs in goals. But I think about like the summer we've had. We've gone to West Virginia University men's soccer game recently. We drove up to Philadelphia to see Man City play in FIFA Club World Cup. We would drive to Pittsburgh to see the Riverhounds, who are a USL Championship team, play. We could go to Columbus and see an MLS team play, right? We could, head south and go to Raleigh-Durham and see North Carolina Courage, the women's team, play. Like, we're sort of spoiled for choice. And by the way, we get up every Saturday morning and watch Premier League games or Bundesliga games. So that entire topic is kind of what you're speaking to, which is the challenge for any brand or sponsor is like, how do you navigate that world in a way that has impact, that creates lasting affinity and lasting connection? That's why I think sort of a diverse portfolio approach, assuming you have the resources to do it, is probably the right approach, because there are so many ways to plug into the sport. And that's what makes it hard, but it's also what makes it really fun. It's like, what's the right recipe for our brand, given this moment in time, what we're trying to do, how we want to build affinity, and what our business objectives are. And at the end of the day, it's one of the reasons I launched Name and Number. It's to help brands and clubs and federations navigate that space and try to come up with the right game plan.
Yeah. What's interesting and I was speaking with somebody the other day who's in the soccer world, and they had called out the concern around NIL in college and potentially the depletion of funding for college sports, and how college soccer may be on that chopping block, at least for scholarships, right? And and I for the first time I said, man, at least for America, that would be a real challenge, I would think, because one of the major reasons I believe that a lot of parents do continue and have their kids play soccer, girls and boys, is the opportunity for to earn college scholarships, especially the girls game. But I look and say, man, well, maybe the USLs of the world could at some point take that position, but still, like, as you bring up college soccer, are you kind of dialed into the health and kind of the strategy for the next couple of years for collegiate soccer?
Yeah, college soccer is interesting. Both men's and women's is interesting because it has kind of reduced in talent pool. So to take WVU as an example, I don't know the roster specifically, Garrett. But I know sort of directionally that there are a lot more international players on the team than there would have been 10, 15 years ago. And you're seeing with the academy systems, both MLS, USL, and increasingly NWSL as well, is your best players, right, ages 10 to 18 are playing in academy systems, and then they're moving on to like either pre-professional or actually signing professional contracts. Those are the best players in the country. So it's not comprehensive across the US. But I think you're seeing the education system shift dramatically separate and apart from sports, right? We're seeing headlines about enrollment being down and sort of projections that enrollment will continue to go down over the next 5 years. So there's going to be an impact. I don't know, what it will be. I love the college game, so I think there'll hopefully will continue to be a place for it. But yeah, it's interesting with NIL, to your point, and just the shifting dynamics of the finance and power in collegiate sports, sort of what might end up on the chopping block. I think what I would say is there will be a place for those athletes to play the sport if they want to continue to play. It'll just be a question of, is it at the academy level? Is it pre-professional? Is it maybe trying to get into, an actual professional environment? But I hope that it survives because I really enjoy it.
Yeah, so do I, and I think it would be detrimental to the to the participation levels in the U.S. if it were to if it were to be reduced or gutted in any way. So I got to believe that the powers that be at U.S. Soccer will figure out a way to how to keep it going.
Well, you'll lose people like me a little bit. I didn't get a college scholarship. I joke all the time I was a D3 bench warmer in college, so I played, but I wasn't very good. But you'll kind of lose that middle group, which is the folks who don't really have the ability or the skill to go professional or play at a higher level. But if you can get a free education, right, by pursuing the sport, right, you might make a different choice or your parents might make a different choice at 12, 13, 14 years old when it comes to it. So I totally agree with you. I hope that they can find a way to figure out the structure of the thing so that it continue, because I think it really is an invaluable experience for that level of player who maybe isn't going pro but wants to keep playing.
So as we kind of look towards 2026, anything that you're sitting here saying, hey, this is what you expect or you're looking forward to in 2026 as it relates to brands and soccer?
Yeah, well, I joke with my team. We've had a number of conversations about helping different brands and federations and clubs next year. There's a part of me that wants to just shut the agency down for a month and a half and go attend games and just be a fan, because it's going to be the best. No, I think it's interesting at this stage, Garrett. I've kind of hinted at it already. I mean, if you aren't already in market with your soccer strategy, you haven't missed out on the World Cup, but it's going to require some pretty quick turn thinking and planning to establish a presence in the sport in order to capitalize as best you can on 2026. So if there's a brand or sponsor that's thinking about entry point to the sport, there really isn't a better time to enter it. Again, I would just sort of reiterate, don't think you're going to come in May and shut it down in October, right? Think we want to introduce ourselves to soccer fans. We want to be a part of the conversation on the biggest sporting event in human history next summer, but it's with a commitment to connect to soccer fans over a longer period of time. And the kind of broader objective of how do we add value to that experience as a soccer fan? How do we speak to the soccer fan both literally and figuratively in the language of the sport, and look at a deeper and kind of longer term connection, because next summer is going to be really, really fun.
I agree. Next summer is going to be fantastic, and I think there's a lot of brands that are truly excited about their soccer activation, their soccer plans for 2026. And I agree. It's there. It's a great time to get into soccer, and it is not too late. I do sense that these brands that are going to get in, or kind of wait to get in, are probably going to have to overspend in order to deliver. But that's kind of that's part of it. Well, Kyle, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, wants to connect with you, what's the best way for folks to do that?
Yeah, the agency website is just nameandnumber.com. Very easy to find. I'm relatively active across LinkedIn, X, and Instagram, so you can find me there as well. Kyle Sheldon, and always happy to connect. We sort of take an approach at the agency of we're always open to a conversation without any expectation. So if there is someone who's thinking about what they want to do in the soccer space and how to think about it, we'll always find time for a conversation to kind of provide some gut check POV. It's a really, I just say again, it's a really exciting time. And maybe I'll sort of close with, while the World Cup is right around the corner, the thing that I wouldn't lose sight of for any brand in the space is just that it's going to just be a massive accelerator, right? So had there not been a World Cup in the US, Canada, Mexico next year, the sport is going to continue on the same trajectory it's been on for the last 15, 20 years, which has been just very clearly up and to the right. But this is going to be a curve that's just going to skyrocket. And so the generational impact that the World Cup will have on soccer fandom for kids age 4 to 20 plus is going to be significant. So again, if you're not in the sport, but you've been thinking about it, this is the time to join in, even if you think you might be a little bit late. It's going to be, massive accelerator for soccer over the next 15, 20 years.
Well, it certainly is a great time to be in sports and certainly sports marketing. So, Kyle, thanks so much for coming on to Sponsorable, and Kyle Sheldon, CEO of Name and Number. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you, Garrett. I really enjoyed the conversation.